In our last example, we were able to visualize the whole data distribution about flight delays, so I could identify both the mean and the median and decide which is useful. But a lot of times, we don't get access to the distribution. We're just presented with either the mean or the median and told to accept that it's a reasonable summary of the data. Let's see why this can be tricky. Here is a quote from The Knot, an online wedding blog about a study of how much readers spend on their weddings. They say, on average, couples spend $28,000 on their ceremony or reception for an all-in total wedding cost of $34,000, back in line with the 2019 spend. And this was from 2021. So all we get is the mean, right? We got on average. We're only getting the mean. But is this a useful statistic? Well, let's think, and I'm going to use some blocks again for this. We can imagine what the data that gave us the mean might look like. So I'm going to make a distribution of imaginary data now. And instead of talking about the exact number of US dollars spent, I'm going to convert it to the number of months of salary, which is maybe a bit easier to think about if you live outside of the US. So over here, I'm going to put brides who spent maybe only 2 or 3 months of salary on a wedding. So maybe this was something, with their immediate family. And at the other end of the table, where the 9s are, somebody who spent, make that into a 9. So we'll have some people who spent, like almost close to a year of their salary. And let's see, I'm going to make the rest of the distribution in the middle. Most people are in the middle here. And you know what, just for this, let's say only one person spent 9 months of salary on their wedding. So this distribution here, kind of like our cupcake distribution, looks neat and symmetrical, and it does have a peak in the middle. So if this is what our data looks like, let's think, which statistic might be helpful for someone planning a wedding who wants to know what a typical reader of The Knot is spending on their party? You try and answer this question, and then we'll discuss. If you said either the mean or the median, you're right. In this case, the mean and the median will both correspond to roughly the peak of the distribution. So they're fair representations of what a typical reader is spending. But what if the data looked quite different? Now, the data looks quite different, right? So now, most people are spending no more than 2 to 4 months of salary on their weddings, but there are a few very expensive events still that are really going to skew this distribution. Skew is another word for saying we have a long tail. Now, the median is still going to be around here, but the mean or the average will be pulled out by these. So the mean is going to be higher than our median. In this case, which statistic do you think would be more relevant to a reader who's trying to plan their own wedding? In this case, the mean is just not all that close to the peak. Most people don't spend as much as the mean on their wedding. So a reader planning their wedding would probably find the median more useful. Now, we don't know which data distribution is more realistic, this one or the more symmetrical one. I think the distribution is likely to have a long tail. I personally think it looks more like this because some weddings can get extremely elaborate. But I don't know. It's actually impossible to tell from knowing only the average cost of a wedding, like in the quote, if that statistic is actually representative of typical brides. One more thing, and let's switch up the question and consider our data from a different perspective. What if I'm no longer planning a wedding, but I'm an entrepreneur who's trying to decide if I want to get into the wedding industry? Maybe I sell flowers for events, and I want to understand how much money I could stand to make by marketing myself to couples who are getting married. Now, this is a little bit of a challenge, but what statistic do you think I care about here? Here, the mean might actually be useful because I don't care if I get money from a lot of small weddings or one really expensive one. I just want to make sure there's money to be made. I can't be positive I'll end up getting hired by the expensive wedding planners, but I know there's a chance. And because the mean takes into account that there are some very extravagant weddings, it does reflect something about my theoretical opportunity. To summarize, the mean and the median are two fundamental statistics that you must know. You'll hear about them a lot as you read the news because they are a quick way to summarize complicated data. But depending on the question that you're asking and the way that the data is distributed, they might not tell you the same thing. Knowing which statistic is helpful depends on the context.